In a quiet town, Megan and Ryan thought their baby was safe. Their dog Diesel was always calm until they got a new babysitter. Then things started to feel wrong. This isn't just a story about a dog. It's about a warning they almost missed. What they saw on the hidden camera shocked them. Before we start, let us know where you're watching from and don't forget to subscribe. Megan stood by the nursery window watching the morning sun slip through the curtains. The soft light touched the edges of the crib where her newborn son, Leo, was asleep. After 5 long years filled with doctor visits, failed treatments, and countless tears, Leo was finally here. She had dreamed about this moment for so long, but nothing had prepared her for the overwhelming love she felt when she first held him. Ryan, her husband, quietly entered the room. He leaned over the crib and gently touched Leo's small hand. Their eyes met, and in that silent moment, both of them knew how much they had endured to reach this day. Their house, once filled with quiet and waiting, now carried the soft sounds of a baby's breathing, the gentle hum of lullabies, and the occasional bark of Diesel, their pitbull. Diesel had been with them for 3 years. They had adopted him during one of the lowest points in their lives when hope seemed too far. Megan had been sinking into sadness, and Ryan thought having a dog might bring some joy back. It worked. Diesel's energy, loyalty, and deep brown eyes brought warmth into their cold days. He became more than a pet. He was part of their family. During Megan's pregnancy, Diesel had stayed close to her. He would rest his head on her belly as if he knew someone was growing inside. Whenever she felt sick or tired, Diesel would curl up beside her, always calm and watchful. Now that Leo was home, Diesel stayed even closer. He lay near the crib day and night. If Leo cried, Diesel was the first to respond, barking softly or rushing to find Megan. It was as if he had taken on the role of a silent guardian. The early days of parenthood were tiring but joyful. Megan and Ryan took turns waking at night, feeding Leo, changing diapers, and trying to learn what each cry meant. Despite the lack of sleep, they were happier than they had ever been. Every small smile from Leo felt like a gift. Every sound he made was a reminder of how far they had come. Family and friends came by to visit. Everyone brought gifts, warm wishes, and advice. Some people were unsure about Diesel being near the baby, but Megan and Ryan always reassured them. Diesel had never shown any sign of aggression. He was gentle, calm, and deeply attached to Leo. If anything, they felt safer with him around. But parenting wasn't easy. After a few weeks, Ryan had to return to work. His job in tech required him to travel now and then. Megan was on maternity leave, but she knew it wouldn't last forever. They started thinking about the future, how they would manage work, house chores, and caring for Leo. They didn't want to leave their baby with just anyone, and daycare felt too cold for someone so small. The idea of hiring a babysitter slowly became part of their conversations. One evening, after putting Leo to sleep, they sat together on the couch, sipping tea. They talked about how quickly time was moving and how they needed to start looking for someone trustworthy. Megan felt nervous about letting a stranger care for their child, but Ryan said they could ask for recommendations from close friends or family. They both agreed that they wouldn't rush the decision. Outside, Diesel barked once, then settled by the front door. He had grown even more protective since Leo's birth. Sometimes he would sit by the crib for hours, watching over the baby as if it were his job. Megan found it touching, even comforting. She often told Diesel that he was doing a good job, and he would wag his tail gently as if he understood. The house was calm that night. Leo slept peacefully, Diesel rested near the crib, and Megan and Ryan sat in quiet relief. For now, everything felt perfect. But deep inside, there was also a quiet worry neither of them voiced. They knew that finding the right person to help them would be difficult. They didn't want to break the balance they had finally found. Still, life moves forward. And with each passing day, Megan began preparing herself to trust someone new. She didn't know it yet, but that decision would test her more than anything before. Diesel, on the other hand, already sensed that change was coming. He watched the door more often. He stayed closer to Leo. He was alert. And somehow he already knew that peace, as they knew it, wouldn't last much longer. Ryan left early the next morning for a short business trip. Megan stood at the door watching him drive away, holding Leo close against her shoulder. It was the first time she'd be alone with the baby for more than a few hours since coming home from the hospital. She wasn't nervous, just tired. The past few weeks had been a mixture of joy and exhaustion. She still hadn't slept for more than 3 hours straight, and the days felt like they passed in one long blur. Diesel followed her back inside, walking closely at her heels. He didn't leave her side all morning. While she fed Leo, Diesel sat by her feet. When she changed diapers, he waited outside the nursery. He even lay by the bathroom door when she showered. Megan laughed softly at his behavior, but part of her felt grateful. She didn't feel so alone with Diesel around. Later that week, her sister Anna stopped by to visit. Megan sat on the couch holding Leo while Anna offered to help with laundry. Over lunch, Megan brought up the idea of hiring a babysitter. Anna listened carefully and said she knew someone who might be able to help. Her neighbor had a niece named Jenna who was looking for part-time work. She had experience babysitting and had taken a few child development classes in college. Megan didn't want to say yes too quickly. She asked Anna to share her number, then spent the next few days thinking it over. She and Ryan had agreed to be careful. They had waited so long for Leo. Trusting someone else with his care felt like handing over their most precious treasure. Still, she also knew she couldn't manage everything on her own forever. Ryan returned 2 days later, tired but cheerful. He brought back small gifts for Megan and a soft stuffed animal for Leo. When she mentioned Jenna, he listened closely and said it couldn't hurt to meet her. They arranged a short interview at the house later that week. Megan made sure to set it during a time when Leo would be awake so she could see how Jenna interacted with him. Jenna arrived on a quiet afternoon. She was in her early 20s with a neat appearance and a soft voice. She smiled when she saw Leo and gently reached out to hold his hand. Megan watched closely, noting that Jenna didn't rush or act too bold. She asked questions about Leo's schedule, feeding times, and what Megan and Ryan expected in terms of care. Megan appreciated the thoughtfulness. Diesel, however, did not react the same way. From the moment Jenna stepped through the door, he became tense. He stood between her and the baby, tail low and ears up. He didn't bark, but his body was stiff and his eyes never left her. Jenna noticed and tried to smile at him, even reaching out a hand. Diesel didn't growl, but he didn't move either. Megan gently called him away and offered him a treat in the kitchen. He went but looked back once, still focused on Jenna. After Jenna left, Megan mentioned Diesel's reaction to Ryan. He brushed it off, saying Diesel might just need time to adjust. He reminded Megan that Diesel had never seen anyone else hold Leo besides them. It was probably just confusion. Megan nodded, but something still felt off. Diesel had always been friendly even toward strangers. This was different. Despite that feeling, they decided to give Jenna a chance. She would come a few mornings a week to help while Megan started easing back into her work-from-home tasks. It seemed like a good balance. Megan would still be around, just not in the same room at all times. The next few visits went smoothly. Jenna arrived on time, followed Megan's instructions, and sent updates when Megan was in meetings. Leo seemed calm in her care, and Jenna always kept the baby monitor nearby. But Diesel's behavior didn't change. In fact, he grew more watchful. Every time Jenna arrived, he would sit near the door. If she walked toward the nursery, Diesel would block the hallway. Sometimes he would bark, low and steady, without any clear reason. Megan began to feel uneasy again. She told Ryan that Diesel was acting like something was wrong. Ryan said maybe Diesel was simply struggling with a new routine. He reminded her how dogs often react to change. Megan tried to agree, but she kept remembering Diesel's eyes, focused, alert, almost like he was trying to speak. She didn't know what to do. Jenna seemed capable, polite, and gentle with Leo. But Diesel's growing discomfort couldn't be ignored. Megan wondered if she was overthinking things. Maybe it was just new mom anxiety. Maybe she was seeing problems where there were none. Still, something in Diesel's posture made her pause. Every time Jenna walked by with Leo in her arms, he would rise to his feet, tail still, watching every move. The next few mornings followed the same pattern. Jenna would arrive quietly, place her bag by the entryway, and go straight to check on Leo. Megan stayed in the home office, trying to get through emails and light tasks while listening through the baby monitor. Diesel always sat nearby, his ears lifting every time Jenna's voice came through the speaker. Megan tried to convince herself that nothing was wrong. Jenna followed every instruction. Leo was fed on time, changed when needed, and never seemed to cry for long. But Diesel's behavior kept pulling her thoughts back. He didn't return to his usual calm. Instead, he kept placing himself between Jenna and the nursery door. If Megan wasn't watching, Diesel would sit right outside Leo's room, making it difficult for Jenna to move freely. That Friday, Megan had a short online meeting. She left Leo with Jenna in the nursery and closed the office door. About 20 minutes in, she heard Diesel barking loudly. It wasn't his usual bark. It was sharp and fast, with a mix of urgency and fear. Her heart raced as she stood up and rushed out. By the time she reached the hallway, Diesel had stopped barking. He stood facing Jenna, who was holding Leo. She looked startled. Diesel stood perfectly still, his eyes locked on her, teeth just slightly visible. Megan's voice broke the tension. Jenna turned quickly and handed Leo back, saying the dog had scared her. She claimed she had only picked Leo up from the crib and that Diesel had suddenly reacted. Megan apologized and took Leo, trying to soothe him. He wasn't crying, but he clung to her shirt tightly. Diesel stayed close, brushing against her legs protectively. She told Jenna to take an early break and stepped into the living room with Leo in her arms. Once Jenna left, the house returned to quiet. Diesel relaxed slightly but didn't leave Leo's side. Megan sat on the couch and looked at her dog. His eyes stayed alert. His breathing was steady, but his body didn't fully settle. Ryan came home later that evening and she told him everything. He listened but still thought Diesel might be reacting to the change in routine. Megan wasn't sure anymore. Diesel had never barked at anyone before, and now he was acting like a guard every time Jenna stepped in the house. They decided not to make any big changes yet. Megan would stay close during Jenna's shifts and keep a careful eye on both of them. They also agreed to limit the time Jenna spent alone with Leo. It felt like a safe compromise. Megan wanted to believe it would be enough. But as the days went on, Diesel's behavior didn't improve. He no longer ate his food in the mornings. Instead, he sat near the nursery door even before Jenna arrived. When she walked in, he would follow her silently, watching her movements with steady eyes. He never barked again, but the tension in his body was clear. Jenna started mentioning her discomfort. She told Megan that she felt nervous being around the dog and asked if he could be kept in another room. Megan didn't respond right away. She said she would think about it. That night, after Leo was asleep, Megan sat beside Diesel on the floor. She ran her fingers gently over his head. His eyes closed, but his ears still moved with each sound. She whispered softly, unsure what to think. Part of her wanted to trust her dog more than her own instincts. Another part was afraid she might be imagining something. The next morning, Jenna arrived on time, smiling as usual. Megan forced a smile back, but something felt heavier than before. As Jenna walked toward the nursery, Diesel rose and blocked the hallway again. Megan told him to move and he obeyed slowly. But as Jenna stepped into the room, Diesel stayed close behind. That afternoon, while Leo napped, Megan sat at the kitchen table thinking. Her mind replayed every moment, every time Diesel had barked, blocked, or whined. She knew dogs could sense danger even when humans couldn't. She also knew how much she loved Diesel. He had never let her down before. For the first time, she considered that Jenna might not be who she appeared to be. She didn't want to believe it, but something wasn't right. And Diesel knew it. He had been trying to say it all along without words. Jenna continued her visits, always arriving with a soft smile and a calm tone. She never raised her voice and always asked Megan how her morning had been. On the surface, nothing looked wrong. Leo appeared content in her care. But Diesel's behavior remained unchanged, and it was beginning to wear on Megan. He no longer wagged his tail when Jenna entered the house. Instead, he stayed alert, quiet, and focused. He walked slower around her, never taking his eyes off her hands when she moved near Leo. During naps, he curled up right outside the nursery door and didn't move until Leo woke up. Megan had never seen him act this way with anyone before. Megan kept watching closely. She began sitting in the nursery more often while Jenna was there. She said she needed to sort clothes or catch up on reading, but the truth was she didn't want to leave Leo alone, not even for a minute. Jenna noticed but said nothing. She simply kept following the routine, never breaking a rule, never stepping out of line. But Diesel still didn't trust her. And the more time passed, the more Megan started to believe that he might have a reason. Ryan noticed the tension, too. One evening after dinner, Megan told him about the latest visit. She said she felt like she was being overly cautious, maybe even unfair, but she couldn't ignore Diesel anymore. Ryan understood but still tried to offer logic. He reminded her that not all dogs reacted well to new people and that Diesel had grown especially protective since Leo was born. Still, he agreed to watch more carefully. He also brought up the idea of setting up the baby monitor in a way that could capture more of the room, just in case. Megan agreed, and together they adjusted the angle of the camera to show the crib and the area around it. The next day, Megan had to leave the house for a short doctor's appointment. It was the first time in weeks that she would be gone for more than 10 minutes during Jenna's visit. Ryan had to be on a video call, so they decided Jenna would handle Leo for an hour. Megan didn't like it, but she didn't want to cancel her appointment again. Before leaving, she gave Diesel a soft pat and whispered something only he could hear. She trusted him more than ever now. As she drove away, her mind kept circling back to the house. She couldn't shake the uneasy feeling building in her chest. When she returned an hour later, everything looked normal. Jenna greeted her politely, said Leo had napped for most of the time, and gave a quick update before leaving. Megan picked up Leo and looked at Diesel. He didn't move from the hallway. He didn't bark. He just stared at the door even after Jenna was gone. That night, Megan went to bed late. Ryan had fallen asleep early, but she couldn't rest. The memory of Diesel's face stayed with her. There was something in his eyes, something she had seen before only once, back when they had rescued him. He had looked like that in the shelter cage, watchful and waiting. She remembered thinking back then that he had seen something awful. She got out of bed and walked quietly to the nursery. Diesel was already there, lying on the floor, his head resting on his paws. He looked up when she entered but didn't move. Megan sat beside him and glanced at the baby monitor screen. Everything looked still. Leo was asleep, peaceful and calm. But something inside her had shifted. For weeks, she had been brushing away her doubts, pushing back the feeling that something was wrong. Now it was clear. Diesel wasn't acting out of confusion or jealousy. He was trying to protect. The next morning, she told Ryan they needed to find out what was going on. He agreed, though his face showed worry. They decided not to tell Jenna anything. Megan would stay home during all her shifts, pretending to be busy but watching every move closely. And if Diesel reacted again, they would start recording everything. They didn't say it out loud, but both of them felt the same growing fear. Something was wrong. They just didn't know what yet. But they were finally ready to find out. Jenna arrived right on time the next day. She placed her bag by the entryway like always, gave Megan a polite smile, and walked toward the nursery. Megan followed a few steps behind, pretending to carry a laundry basket. She placed it by the door and stayed close, folding tiny clothes one by one while Jenna tended to Leo. Diesel was already in position. He sat beside the crib, eyes on Jenna's hands as she picked Leo up. His body stayed low and tense, his breathing slow but heavy. Megan tried not to react. She kept her focus on the clothes but noticed every movement Jenna made. Everything seemed normal, nothing rushed, nothing careless, but Diesel still didn't look away. Over the next few days, this became routine. Megan kept close, watching. Jenna performed every task correctly. She changed diapers with care, prepared bottles with clean hands, and kept Leo calm. But despite how normal everything looked, Diesel's reaction stayed the same. He followed Jenna's every step. He wouldn't let her pass without staying near. He didn't bark, but his silence felt louder than any noise. Megan's nerves began to wear thin. She couldn't relax, even during the moments when everything appeared peaceful. At night, she lay awake thinking about the smallest details, how Jenna barely looked Diesel in the eye, how her smile didn't reach her eyes, how she never seemed truly warm toward Leo, only careful. It was like she was doing what she was told, but without emotion. One morning, Megan decided to test something. She told Jenna she had to take a short phone call in another room and left the nursery. But instead of going far, she stepped just out of sight and watched through a small crack in the doorway. Diesel stayed behind, close to Leo's crib. At first, nothing changed. Jenna walked to the crib and adjusted the blanket. Then she sat in the chair beside it and took out her phone. She didn't notice Megan watching. After a few minutes, she began speaking quietly. Her words were hard to catch, but she wasn't talking to Leo. She seemed focused on the phone call, her voice low and quick. Diesel stood up slowly and moved between her and the crib. He didn't growl, but his presence was enough to make Jenna pause. She looked at him for a moment, then slipped her phone back into her bag. She got up and began tidying the room instead. Megan stepped back into the room, pretending to have finished her call. Jenna turned quickly and smiled, asking how the conversation went. Megan answered with a nod and took Leo into her arms. Diesel relaxed as soon as she entered, moving to her side like a shadow. That night, Megan told Ryan everything. She described the quiet phone call, Diesel's reaction, and the way Jenna had changed her behavior the moment she realized she was no longer alone. Ryan listened carefully, saying very little. When she finished, he said it was time to take things seriously. They didn't want to cause a scene. They didn't want to accuse anyone without proof. But they couldn't wait any longer. Ryan remembered that the baby monitor had a memory card inside. It could record short clips when movement was detected. Megan had forgotten that setting even existed. They decided to check it that night. Ryan plugged the card into his computer and opened the most recent files. Most clips showed simple things: Leo sleeping, Megan entering the room, Diesel moving around. But a few clips caught moments when Megan was away, even just for a minute. One clip showed Jenna holding Leo while speaking on the phone in a tone far colder than usual. She didn't hurt him, but her voice sounded annoyed. Her hands moved too fast. Her face showed frustration that Megan had never seen in person. Ryan saved the files and copied them to a folder. They agreed not to jump to conclusions yet. One clip wasn't enough. But Megan now had confirmation that her instincts and Diesel's behavior were pointing to something real. The next morning, Megan acted as if nothing had changed. She greeted Jenna at the door, handed over the usual bottle and blanket, and stepped into her office. But she didn't work. She opened the monitor feed and watched everything carefully, writing down notes as she observed. Diesel stayed near the crib just as he always did. And once again, Jenna seemed calm and gentle until she thought no one was watching. Megan now understood what Diesel had sensed all along. The peaceful mask Jenna wore in front of others was just that, a mask. And she was slowly preparing to uncover what was hidden behind it. The day started like the others. Jenna arrived on time, placed her bag in the usual spot, and went straight to check on Leo. Megan greeted her with a polite smile, then stepped into the office where the baby monitor was already running. She had her notebook ready, planning to take notes again. Diesel was in his usual place, lying just outside the nursery door, ears perked up and eyes steady. For the first 30 minutes, nothing seemed out of place. Jenna fed Leo and rocked him gently. She hummed softly as she walked around the room. Diesel stayed close, never taking his eyes off her. Megan kept watching. She didn't want to miss anything. Then something changed. Megan heard Diesel growl, a low, steady sound. She looked at the monitor. Jenna had placed Leo back in his crib and turned away, facing the window. Her posture was stiff. She took her phone from her pocket and started speaking in a hushed tone. Megan couldn't make out the words, but the tone was sharper than usual. Diesel stood up, moved toward the crib, and stood in front of it. His growl grew louder. Megan jumped up and rushed toward the nursery. By the time she got there, Jenna had stepped back from the window, hiding her phone quickly. She smiled as if nothing had happened, saying Leo had just fallen asleep. Diesel stood firmly between her and the crib. Megan bent down, placed a hand on Diesel's back, and quietly told Jenna she'd take over from there. Jenna nodded and left the room. Megan stayed in the nursery for the rest of the hour, sitting quietly with Diesel beside her. She didn't speak. She didn't even pick up her phone. She simply sat and tried to think clearly. Something inside her had shifted completely now. She didn't just feel uneasy. She felt certain that something was wrong. That evening, Megan and Ryan sat at the kitchen table while Leo slept in the next room. Megan played the monitor clip from earlier that day. They both listened to Jenna's voice through the grainy audio. Her tone didn't match the way she acted around them. She sounded annoyed, impatient. There were no gentle words, no calming tone. Just short phrases and a sharp edge. Ryan leaned back in his chair, rubbing his eyes. They both felt the same weight pressing down on them. Jenna wasn't just a poor fit. She was hiding something. They had one final shift scheduled with Jenna before the weekend. Megan and Ryan decided to let it happen, but only under full supervision. Megan would stay in the nursery the entire time. No pretending. No watching from the office. Just her, Diesel, and Leo. The next morning, Jenna seemed surprised to see Megan waiting in the nursery with Leo already in her arms. Megan smiled and said she wanted to spend more time with the baby today. Jenna didn't ask questions. She just nodded and took a seat near the window. The next hour passed slowly. Megan watched everything Jenna did. She handed her Leo once, just to observe. Jenna took him gently, but her face seemed tighter, less relaxed. Diesel sat by Megan's feet, eyes fixed on Jenna's hands. He didn't growl this time, but his body was tense, ready to move. As the shift came to an end, Megan thanked Jenna and walked her to the door. Jenna smiled again, but her eyes darted toward Diesel, who stood silently behind Megan. There was something strange in the way she looked at him. Not fear, something colder, more distant. After Jenna left, Megan turned to Diesel. He wagged his tail once and returned to Leo's room. That small movement made Megan's chest tighten. For weeks, Diesel had been full of tension. That short tail wag was the first sign of relief. That night, Ryan checked the latest recordings. There was one short clip where Jenna, thinking she was alone, said something into her phone that caught his attention. She used a name they didn't recognize. Then she said a date. Then, after a pause, she looked straight at the crib and whispered something that wasn't clear, but didn't sound right. Ryan saved the clip. It was time to take the next step. They decided they would cancel all future shifts with Jenna. But before doing that, they wanted to show the footage to someone else. Megan contacted a friend who worked in child safety services. She didn't want to make assumptions, but she also didn't want to leave anything to chance. Diesel curled up on the rug near Leo's crib as they talked late into the night. Megan reached down and touched his head gently. He was still alert, but the weight in his eyes seemed lighter. She whispered a quiet thank you, knowing he had been right all along. They had almost missed it. But now they were ready. The next morning was quiet. Megan didn't call Jenna. She and Ryan had decided the night before that they wouldn't let her near Leo again. Instead, Megan spent the entire day with the baby while Ryan arranged a meeting with a contact from local child protection services. They wanted to handle everything carefully without jumping to conclusions but without ignoring the signs either. Diesel seemed calmer now. He stayed near Leo as always, but his body no longer looked so stiff. Megan noticed he even lay on his side during Leo's nap, something he hadn't done in weeks. It was a small change, but it meant something. The house felt lighter without Jenna's presence. Later that afternoon, Ryan returned home with updates. He had shown the short video clips and explained their concerns to the officer. Though there wasn't enough proof to accuse Jenna of a crime yet, the officer agreed that something seemed off. He advised them to gather more evidence if possible and warned them not to confront her directly. Instead, they would try to verify Jenna's background and see if there were any reports connected to her name. Megan felt torn. Part of her wanted to protect her family immediately and cut all ties with Jenna. But the other part knew they needed answers. Something wasn't right, and if Jenna had done this before, other families could be at risk too. That night, Megan stayed up late reviewing every file from the baby monitor. Ryan helped her copy all the clips onto a separate device. As they watched, they saw more moments that didn't sit well. Small things, how Jenna's face would harden when she thought no one was looking, how she held Leo too tightly when frustrated, how she would speak sharply to him in between cheerful updates to Megan. One clip caught their attention the most. In it, Jenna stepped into the nursery and began talking on the phone. Her voice was low, but her words were clearer this time. She mentioned sending something soon and asked if the other person had the right link. Then, after a pause, she leaned over the crib and laughed quietly. It wasn't the kind of laugh Megan was used to hearing from her. It sounded forced, almost cruel. The next day, Megan called the child protection contact again and shared the new clips. They said they would look into Jenna's background and alert the police if they found anything suspicious. Meanwhile, Megan and Ryan were told to remain cautious and not share anything with Jenna. 3 days passed with no visits, and Megan began to feel like things were slowly returning to normal. Diesel's behavior continued to improve. He followed Leo around playfully, even wagging his tail more often. Megan felt proud of him and also guilty for not trusting him fully sooner. On the 4th day, Jenna called. Megan stared at the screen as the phone rang. She didn't answer. Instead, she let it go to voicemail. A few minutes later, a message came in. Jenna said she had been sick and hoped everything was okay. She asked if she could resume her shifts later that week. Megan didn't respond. She forwarded the voicemail to the officer and waited. That evening, a call came from Child Protection Services. They had found something. Jenna's full name didn't match the one she had given. The identification she used belonged to someone else. Her real name showed up in a few flagged online groups, some of which were under investigation. Nothing had been proven yet, but the links were disturbing. The officer advised Megan and Ryan to remove all access Jenna had to their home. They were told to change the locks, block her number, and stay alert. Police would begin monitoring her movements, but she hadn't been arrested yet. Megan's hands shook as she packed up Jenna's leftover items, a water bottle, a notepad, and a few other things she had left behind. She placed them in a plastic bag and set them aside. She didn't want anything of Jenna's in the house. Diesel stayed close that evening. He followed Megan from room to room, never letting her out of his sight. When Leo cried, he was the first to run into the nursery. Ryan didn't sleep much that night. He sat at the kitchen table with his laptop, going through files again. Megan joined him around midnight. They sat in silence, both thinking the same thing. If Diesel hadn't reacted the way he did, if Megan hadn't listened to that feeling in her chest, if Ryan hadn't checked the recordings, they might never have known. Now, there was only one thing left to do. They had to make sure the police had enough to act. And they had to protect their home from whatever was still coming. Megan didn't sleep at all. She lay in bed listening to the quiet sounds of the house, the soft ticking of the clock, and the occasional shifting of Diesel's body on the floor beside the crib. Every creak of the wood, every movement in the wind outside made her sit up slightly, listening harder. She wasn't afraid, but her mind was heavy. There were too many thoughts, too many unanswered questions. At dawn, she rose from bed and walked to the kitchen. She made coffee and sat by the window. Diesel came into the room a few minutes later and rested at her feet. The house was still dark, the sky barely starting to lighten. Megan held her cup tightly and looked down at him. His eyes were half closed, but he was awake. Always alert. Ryan joined her an hour later. He had barely slept either. They spoke softly, going over everything once again. Megan asked what would happen next. Ryan said the officer told him the case was now being monitored by a special team. They were gathering more evidence, trying to confirm Jenna's identity and track her contacts. There was no guarantee she would be arrested immediately, but the investigation was active. Megan couldn't stop thinking about how close they had come to missing everything. If Diesel hadn't reacted the way he did, if she hadn't paid attention to the small changes, they might have left Leo alone with someone hiding something dangerous. The thought made her stomach turn. Later that day, the officer called again. They had more information. Jenna had used multiple names in the past. She had worked in different cities, always as a nanny or babysitter. In one case, a family had reported unusual behavior, but the complaint had been dropped due to lack of proof. She disappeared soon after. That case was being reopened. Megan listened quietly, her heart beating faster. The officer explained that they believed Jenna was connected to an online group involved in illegal content sharing. Nothing had been fully confirmed, but several of the people she had contacted were already under investigation. The situation was serious. They asked Megan and Ryan to hand over all the recordings. Ryan transferred the files and delivered them in person that afternoon. The officer promised to keep them updated and said they had done the right thing. Megan thanked him, but the weight in her chest didn't lift. She felt cold and tired, unsure how to feel about any of it. That evening, Megan stayed in the nursery longer than usual. She sat beside Leo's crib, gently rubbing his back while he slept. Diesel lay across the doorway, his eyes fixed on the hallway. He didn't move unless Megan did. She whispered his name, and he lifted his head. She didn't speak much, just ran her hand down his back slowly. The next morning, there was another call. This time from a different officer. They had acted on a search order. Jenna's apartment had been searched and her electronics had been seized. What they found confirmed everything. There were files, messages, and contacts that linked her to a group involved in illegal activity. She had used her jobs as a way to get close to families and children. Megan felt sick hearing the words. The officer told her Jenna had been taken into custody. They wouldn't share more details yet, but the case was strong. She thanked them and hung up slowly. She turned to Ryan and told him what she had just heard. He didn't speak. He only nodded and walked into the nursery. Megan followed him. They stood there in silence, watching Leo sleep peacefully. Diesel sat near the crib, watching them both. There were no words to say. Just the quiet relief of knowing the danger was no longer at their door. Later that night, they locked the front door and checked the windows. Megan turned off the baby monitor and picked up Leo, holding him close. Diesel followed them to the bedroom and settled by the door. For the first time in weeks, Megan felt a little more at peace. She would never forget what had happened. She would never forget how close they had come to trusting the wrong person. But more than anything, she would never forget who had warned them first. A dog with no voice, but with instincts that had saved their son. The following days moved slowly. Megan tried to return to a normal routine, but everything felt different. She no longer trusted easily. Each sound in the house made her listen more carefully. Every knock at the door made her heart beat faster. The relief of knowing Jenna was in custody hadn't erased the fear completely. It lingered in quiet corners, showing up when least expected. Ryan spent more time at home. He adjusted his schedule to stay close, helping with Leo and taking care of things Megan hadn't had time for. He didn't say much about what had happened. He simply stayed close, present, and steady. Megan spoke with the officer again. He said the case was developing quickly. Authorities had arrested 2 more people connected to Jenna's online activity. The files they found in her apartment led to other names, addresses, and networks. The group had been more organized than anyone expected. The investigation was now being handled by a special division. The officer told her that their recordings played a key role. The quiet audio clips, the video of Jenna's strange behavior, and Diesel's presence in the footage helped piece together the timeline. It wasn't just their family that had been at risk. There were others. And because of their decision to act, more children were now safe. Megan hung up the phone and sat for a long time without moving. Her hands were still. Her eyes stared ahead. It wasn't pride she felt, it was a deep, quiet ache. The kind that came from understanding how much worse things could have been. Leo was growing quickly. He had started turning his head towards sounds, smiling more often and sleeping for longer stretches. His tiny fingers now gripped tighter, and his eyes followed Diesel around the room with curiosity. Megan watched these changes carefully, grateful for every small sign that life was moving forward. Diesel stayed close. He returned to his usual habits but remained more alert than before. Megan noticed how he still checked the nursery door each night. Even after Leo was asleep, Diesel would walk in, sit for a few minutes, and then lie down just outside, facing the hallway. Ryan suggested they reward Diesel somehow. Megan agreed. They took him to a quiet park on the weekend, brought his favorite toy, and let him run freely for a while. For the first time in weeks, Megan saw him chase a squirrel with full energy. His tail wagged. His body relaxed. He looked like the dog he used to be before the tension had taken over. When they returned home, Megan placed a new bed for him right beside Leo's crib. It was soft, lined with his favorite blanket. Diesel stepped into it that evening without hesitation and lay down with a deep breath. One evening, Megan sat alone in the nursery with Leo in her arms. The room was warm and quiet. A soft lamp glowed in the corner. She thought about the choices they had made, how close they had come to ignoring the signs, how easy it would have been to dismiss Diesel's behavior as simple jealousy or confusion. She knew now that listening had made all the difference. Trusting what couldn't be explained, observing what didn't seem obvious, and taking quiet action had led them to the truth. It wasn't something she would forget. The next day, Megan received a letter from the officer. It wasn't official. Just a short note thanking her and Ryan for their patience and help. He wrote that families like theirs often played a silent role in uncovering bigger crimes. He ended the note by saying that Diesel's instinct had saved lives. Megan folded the letter and placed it in a drawer. Not because she wanted to forget, but because she needed to keep moving forward. Leo stirred in his crib and Diesel lifted his head. Megan smiled and reached down to pet him. His eyes closed slowly and he settled back onto the blanket. For the first time in a long while, the house felt calm. Not because everything was perfect, but because the danger had passed. And because the ones who remained had found their way back to peace. The days grew longer and spring light began to stretch into the evenings. Megan found herself moving through the house with a little more ease. The weight in her chest, once constant and heavy, was lighter now. There were still moments when a noise would startle her or a memory would rise without warning, but they were fewer. Each morning brought a little more comfort. Each night passed with less fear. Leo continued to grow. His small hands reached out more. His laughter came more often, soft and sudden. Megan cherished these little moments, knowing how different things could have been. She watched him sleep in his crib, surrounded by calm, and often found herself looking at Diesel with quiet gratitude. Diesel had settled back into his old rhythm. He still stayed near Leo, but no longer with the same tension in his body. He didn't bark at shadows. He didn't block doorways. He no longer paced through the night. Instead, he curled up beside the crib, sometimes lifting his head when Leo stirred, sometimes letting out a soft sigh as he drifted into sleep. The police called once more. They informed Megan and Ryan that Jenna had been charged and would remain in custody while the investigation continued. More names had been uncovered. Files found on her devices linked her to people in other regions. It would take time to build the full case, but there was no doubt anymore. She would not return. Megan listened quietly, asked no questions, and thanked the officer again. She hung up the phone and stepped outside into the backyard. The breeze was cool, the trees barely moving. Diesel followed her out and lay down in the grass. She sat beside him and watched the sky. That afternoon, she wrote down everything that had happened. Not for a blog or a post. Not even for friends or family. She wrote it down for herself, every part of it, from the first day Jenna arrived to the final call from the officer. She included every detail she could remember, especially the small things, like Diesel's pacing, the way Jenna's smile never reached her eyes, and the moment she knew something was wrong. She stored the pages in a folder and placed it in a box along with the printed copy of the officer's letter and a few photos of Diesel lying by the crib. It wasn't something she planned to look at often, but she wanted to keep it. Not as a reminder of fear, but as a record of trust, instinct, and quiet action. Later that week, a neighbor dropped by. She was looking for a part-time babysitter for her own toddler and asked Megan if she had any recommendations. Megan paused for a moment, then gently said she couldn't think of anyone right now. The neighbor thanked her and walked away. Megan stood at the door for a long time after she left. Some stories never get told beyond the walls of the home where they happen. Megan understood that now. What mattered most wasn't who knew or how widely the story was shared. What mattered was that Leo was safe, Diesel was still by their side, and their family had made it through something they hadn't expected but had faced together. That night, Megan sat beside Leo's crib while Ryan read quietly in the living room. Diesel was already asleep, his head resting on his front paws. The house was silent except for the gentle sound of breathing. Megan closed her eyes for a moment and listened to the calm. Everything had changed, and yet life had found its way back to peace. There was still more ahead. More nights, more laughter, more growing. But now Megan felt ready to meet those days. With open eyes, careful trust, and a loyal dog who had seen what no one else could see. If you loved this story, like the video.